Welcome to Smart Procurement, where we make procurement simple, smart, and practical. No fluff, no confusion, just real insights you can use. Let's begin.
Hi, and welcome to new lecture from Smart Procurement. In procurement, not every purchase comes with 3 quotes and a competitive bidding war. Sometimes you only have one option. But here's the real question. Do you have one supplier available, or are you choosing one supplier? Because in procurement, those are 2 very different situations. Today, we're breaking down one of the most misunderstood topics in sourcing strategy: single source versus sole source. They sound almost identical, but from a compliance, risk, and audit perspective, they are worlds apart. One is about market reality. The other is about strategic choice. And if you mix them up, you could expose your organization to serious financial, legal, and reputational risks. Let's clear the confusion once and for all. Sole source procurement. Let's talk about sole source procurement. This occurs when only one supplier is truly capable of meeting the organization's requirement, not because we prefer them, but because the market leaves us no alternative. In a sole source situation, there is only one supplier in the entire market with the capability, capacity, or legal rights to provide the product or service. There are no acceptable substitutes. No equivalent alternatives. The lack of competition is driven by external factors, such as technology, intellectual property, or regulation, not by restrictive specifications or buyer choice. So what typically makes something sole source? First, the product or service is unique or proprietary. Second, intellectual property rights, like patents, copyrights, or exclusive distribution agreements, legally prevent competition. Third, compatibility or system integration requirements make switching suppliers technically impossible or highly impractical. And finally, regulations or laws may mandate using a specific supplier. Here are a few simple examples. A patented medical device that only one manufacturer produces. A proprietary software system where only the original developer can provide updates and technical support. Or a government-designated supplier required to meet regulatory compliance. In short, sole source procurement isn't about preference. It's about market reality. Single source procurement. Now let's look at single source procurement. And this is where many people get confused. A single source situation is different from sole source. Here, multiple suppliers are capable of providing the product or service. The market has options, but the organization deliberately chooses to purchase from one specific supplier. In other words, the lack of competition is decision-driven, not market-driven. The choice is strategic. It may be based on performance, reliability, cost efficiency, risk management, or long-term value. So why would a company choose single sourcing? One reason could be consistency, selecting a long-term partner to maintain stable quality and service levels. Another reason could be superior commercial terms, such as better warranty coverage, stronger after-sales support, or a proven service history. Or the company may want to standardize equipment, systems, or components across all sites to simplify maintenance, training, and inventory management. In short, single-source procurement is a strategic choice, not a market limitation. Let's quickly break down the key difference between sole source and single-source procurement. It all comes down to one simple question. Is it the market forcing the decision, or is it the organization choosing the decision? In a sole source situation, only one supplier exists. There are no alternatives, no substitutes, no competition. The limitation comes from the market itself, maybe due to patents, proprietary technology, or legal requirements. The buyer doesn't really have a choice. Now compare that to single source. Here, the market does offer options. Multiple suppliers are capable, but the organization deliberately chooses to work with just one. That decision may be based on performance, long-term partnership, better service, risk reduction, or standardization. So here's the simplest way to remember it. Sole source is driven by necessity. Single source is driven by strategy. One is a market constraint. The other is a management decision. And understanding that difference is critical for audit clarity, compliance, and smart procurement governance. Why does this distinction matter? Understanding the difference between sole source and single source isn't just academic. it directly impacts compliance, risk, and negotiation power. First, compliance and audit requirements. In a sole source situation, documentation must be strong. You need clear market research. You need written justification. And you must demonstrate that no alternatives truly exist. Auditors will look closely at these cases. With single source, the process is less restrictive. You still need internal approval and a solid rationale, but you're not proving that the market has no options. You're explaining a strategic choice. Second, risk management. Sole source increases dependency. If that one supplier fails, delays, or increases prices, you have limited flexibility. Your vulnerability is higher. Single source, on the other hand, gives you an exit option. Other suppliers exist, which means you can switch if performance drops or risk increases. And third, pricing and negotiation. In sole source situations, the supplier naturally has more leverage. They know competition doesn't exist. But in single source arrangements, even if you choose one supplier, you can still benchmark pricing, request competitive intelligence, and maintain negotiation power. So the distinction matters. It affects governance. It affects risk exposure. And it affects how strong you stand at the negotiation table. And that's why procurement professionals must never confuse the two. When should you use each approach? Let's make this practical. When should you use sole source? And when does single source make more sense? Start with sole source. You use sole source when the product is truly unique. Maybe it's patented, proprietary, or protected by intellectual property. You use it when only one supplier can technically meet your specifications. Or when switching suppliers simply isn't possible because of system compatibility, integration constraints, or operational dependencies. In these cases, you're not choosing exclusivity. The market is forcing it. Now let's talk about single source. You use single source when you want to consolidate spend and strengthen your purchasing power. You use it when operational consistency matters. For example, standardizing equipment, processes, or service levels across all sites. And you use it when a supplier has demonstrated reliability, superior performance, or exceptional service history. Here, exclusivity is strategic. It's intentional. It's a business decision. So remember, sole source is about necessity. Single source is about strategy. And knowing when to apply each one is what separates reactive procurement from strategic procurement leadership. Risks and mitigation strategies. Let's look at the risks, starting with sole source. When only one supplier exists in the market, the exposure is higher. You face the risk of supplier monopoly. That supplier holds significant power. There's also the risk of price escalation. Without competition, pricing pressure decreases. And finally, supply disruption. If that one supplier experiences operational, financial, or geopolitical issues, your business feels it immediately. So how do you mitigate these risks? You establish strong long-term contracts with clear performance clauses and pricing controls. You conduct dual sourcing feasibility studies to explore whether alternatives could become viable in the future, and you perform regular market scanning, because markets evolve and new competitors can emerge. Now let's move to single source risks. Here, the market does offer alternatives, but you've chosen to work with one supplier. The main risk is over-reliance, and over time, there's a danger of reduced competitive pressure. When a supplier knows they are the preferred choice, performance discipline can weaken. How do you manage that? Through periodic competitive benchmarking. Even if you don't switch suppliers, you compare pricing and performance against the market. Through structured supplier performance reviews with measurable KPIs, and by maintaining a list of pre-qualified alternative suppliers, ready if needed. In short, both approaches carry risk, but with the right controls, procurement stays in control, not the supplier. Conclusion. Understanding the difference between single source and sole source procurement is not just a technical detail. It's a strategic necessity. This distinction directly impacts transparency, compliance, and governance. It affects your risk exposure. It influences your cost structure. It shapes your negotiation power. And it determines how audit-ready your organization truly is. When procurement professionals clearly distinguish between the two, they don't just follow process. They make informed, defensible sourcing decisions. And most importantly, they can justify those decisions with confidence. Because in modern procurement, clarity isn't optional, it's leadership. Thank you for watching. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new insight on procurement and supply chain strategy. Give this video a like if it added value to your knowledge. It really helps the channel grow and reach more professionals like you. And feel free to share it with your team or colleagues who want to make smarter sourcing decisions. This is Smart Procurement, where strategy meets clarity. See you in the next video.